In the sometimes strained relations between Japan and South Korea, the coronavirus outbreak has exposed the animosity that exists below the surface. South Korea says it wasn't consulted before Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced the new measures.
Visitors from both China and South Korea will be required to be quarantined for 2 weeks at the location designated by the quarantine director and asked that they refrain from using public transportation in the country.
That brought a swift response from Seoul. The Japanese ambassador was summoned for an official reprimand.
We find this very regrettable and urge the Japanese government to withdraw such an excessive and unreasonable measure immediately. Our government will devise a proper countermeasure against Japan's measures.
Opponents in South Korea accuse the Japanese government of trying to deflect criticism of its handling of the coronavirus outbreak. In particular, the attempted quarantining of a cruise ship that left hundreds of passengers sickened. While criticizing Japan's efforts, South Korea has been quick to show the scale and transparency of its own response, which has won international praise. Testing on an industrial scale means thousands of people are being checked for the virus every day.
South Korea has been touted as an outstanding example of releasing information in a transparent and rapid manner. In that sense, I believe that Japan's move did not fully take into account our central and local government's efforts.
The growing dispute between two leading countries in the fight against this global health emergency is worrying for the international community. The two sides have long disagreed over trade and the legacy of the Second World War. More than 100 countries now have travel restrictions on people arriving from South Korea. But unlike many of them, Japan is a vital trading partner. This quarantine measure will cause further economic pain, and there's a lingering suspicion here that politics, not public health, is the motivation behind it. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Pleased to welcome Robert Kelly to the news. I'm Professor of International Relations and Political Science at PUSAN National University. He's on Skype from there. Nice to have you with us, Mr. Kelly. South Korea saying that this move by Japan is regrettable. I can understand why they might say that, but you can also see from the Japanese perspective why they would take such a measure. Has South Korea perhaps overreacted a bit?
Yeah, I would actually say I think they have a little bit. I think a lot of it is really sort of layered over with the sort of general animosity there is in South Korea regarding Japanese foreign policy and the legacy of the war. And so anything that comes from Japan that seems to single out South Korea or sort of call it out individually gets met sort of with pushback, particularly from the South Korean left, which currently holds the presidency. But yeah, part of it also too reflects the fact that the current president of South Korea has not actually imposed a travel ban on Chinese coming into South Korea, and he's being sort of blamed for that, leading to the sort of big outbreak here that's happened. And right now it looks like the Japanese are doing it to South Koreans, so the South Koreans feel sort of compelled to kind of push back to, I think, sort of justify the decision not to ban Chinese travelers. It's kind of a tangle.
Other than talking about its regret, as South Korea has done, what sort of reaction would you expect from them further from here?
Well, I think the most obvious thing to do would be to ban Japanese travelers in response, right? And that, of course, gets tricky, right? Because Korea, with all three of them, right? Korea, Japan, and China trade a great deal, right? And not just tourism, which is obviously a problem now, but I mean, all of them are high up trade partners for one another. So if they start banning each other, it actually gets pretty tricky. This has been sort of the pressure on all of them to sort of avoid cutting business links and stuff like that. I would imagine the Koreans might consider tariffs or something like that, or restrictions on cultural imports. I mean, there are all sorts of sort of small things that the South Koreans can do to sort of hit back. But I mean, until the South Korean government gets the virus outbreak here under control, which I think is beginning to happen, I think that things are starting to turn in the last couple of days. But until they do, a lot of countries are going to do what the Japanese did.
Actually, while you're talking about South Korea, can I ask, you are self-isolating, I believe, is that right?
Yeah, well, the government is telling people basically not to go anywhere, actually. You know, I mean, we're basically sort of locked in our house. I mean, my job has been, I'm a college professor. I'm not teaching right now. They just canceled class for the next 2 weeks. My kids are in kindergarten. That's also been canceled. So we're basically just stuck in the house.
Yeah, how's that going? I mean, obviously we all know your kids. We've seen them. How
Right.
are they coping? They had a great free spirit when we saw them on that famous interview. Now, how are they coping with being cooped up in the house?
Not well. Yeah, free spirits are not good with, you know, a couple of rooms in an apartment. Yeah, I mean, we live in an apartment, and there's just not a lot of place for them to go, right? To sort of crawling the walls and stuff like that. I mean, it is actually rather tough. And this is something you're hearing all over South Korea, right? That parents having a lot of trouble managing their kids, you know, and people are having trouble staying home from work, right? I mean, people got to go to work. They got to go to the grocery store. I'm actually kind of wondering what the government's going to do if they're still telling us in a month that we can't leave our house. I mean, we're now ordering food over the internet. We're not allowed to take our kids to the jungle gym. They've closed the gym in my building. I mean, it's just there's just like nothing you can do inside the complex anymore, and the streets are empty. I wonder how much longer the government can sustain this.
Right. So this is going beyond the 14 days, which we hear about for most people who sort of, if you've been to X country and you come back from there, then you should self-isolate for 2 weeks because that's the apparent incubation period. But you're just talking about an open-ended, pretty much don't go out.
Well, that's what the government has told us, right? I mean, we're sort of, you know, I mean, we're not, you know, not many people are epidemiologists, of course, so we're sort of following what the government says. And right now, yeah, it's something of a blanket recommendation that you don't go outside, that you stay in, that you avoid large groups of people, that you don't really go to any kind of congregation of any kind, right? I mean, don't go to a concert, don't go to church, don't go to a, you know, don't go to, I don't know, you know, go run a race or something like that. I mean, just stay away from people almost altogether. And that's what's so difficult, right? Because that basically means that the kids just can't leave the house, right? And that's just, it's just, you're just, everybody's just getting cabin fever, right? And you can see it when I see it when I talk to friends of mine too. They're all struggling with the same issue, right? Like, how do you sort of manage all this time indoors?
Robert Kelly, good to talk to you. Best wishes to the family. Hope it all goes well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.